Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today in this first event during World Green Building Week, the first event for the Americas Regional Network. We welcome you all to Building Resilience for Climate, People, and Economies. This webinar is called Regional Spotlight, a journey to resilience in the Americas. Today, we're going to talk about how we can build through sustainable buildings resilience for climate, people, and economies. We want to take this holistic approach on sustainable buildings so that we can understand the different strategies, resources, information, knowledge, and efforts that we can take forward so that together in collaboration, we can work towards achieving the different sustainable goals, sustainable development goals, and work as a community, as a region, to bring solutions to climate change and to the challenges that we are facing right now. Today, we're going to have a session that will be divided in 3 parts. The first part, we're going to be talking about building resilience for people. This is going to be a 45-minute session, each of them, that will share from experts across the region insights, knowledge, projects, and information that we know you're going to enjoy. And to bring this beginning of the week some inspiration and motivation to talk about resilience in the different aspects. Following, we're going to talk about building resilience for climate. Where are the strategies for doing so? What are the situations that as a region we have faced and how we can overcome them? And then we will end the session with a conversation around building resilience for economies and taking an approach thinking about cities and policies and how we can work around this. To begin our first session, I would like to welcome Maria Fernanda Aguirre. She's CEO from the Chile Green Building Council, one of our members across the region. And she's going to start our session introducing to our panelists. And we thank you all for joining us and for being here today. Maria Fernanda, thank you.
Thank you so much, Juanita. Thank you to the World Green Building Council for inviting me to be a moderator for this session. I want, first of all, to introduce 2 amazing professionals. One of these professionals, I'm very happy to call her my friend. So I have to read this, because I have to read, of course, the bios of these professionals. The first is Elizabeth Torres. She's a professional in sustainable development, head of CEUS, Universal Equity and Sustainability, dedicated to promoting sustainability in Mexico and Latin America. She has more than 10 years of experience working with frontline communities and groups, corporate social responsibility, education in environmental issues, combating climate change, environmental psychology, and the built environment. I am also very happy to add that she has a very supporting actor in many of the events that Chile GBC has been holding during the last year. So thank you very much, Elizabeth. And next, Juan Carlos Sapien is Manager of Technological Solutions in Construction and in WASH for Habitat for Humanity, Latin America and the Caribbean. Juan Carlos has more than 30 years of experience in various areas of construction and water, sanitation, and hygiene. He has led social housing projects with special attention to participatory processes and self-construction. So, said this, I want to welcome Elizabeth and Juan Carlos. Thank you very much for being part of this first session of this very important event that has, as the main key towards building resilience. That is something that we as a World Green Building Council have been working very hard during, the last time. We had a meeting last week to coordinate, and to organize some of the things that we were going to talk during this first session. So what we want is to this conversation to flow, but we have, 4 main parts that I want to introduce, so to give you the word, so you can, of course, go deeper in each of these specific topics. And I want to tell to the public that we also prepared 2 polls. One is, in the middle of the session, and the other, goes at the end of the session. And we invite you all to participate because your information is very important for us. We can gather, all your answers, and will be very important inputs to the work that World GBC, carries out, and also the GBCs that are part of the Americas Regional Network. So first, Juan Carlos and Elizabeth, I think that is very important to talk about, accessibility, availability, and quality of housing. I know, Juan Carlos, that is something that you have been working very hard during the last years, and it's part of two of the key points that, the World GBC wants to relevate as part of the discussion, which are, how does the built environment contribute to the development of resilient communities, and also how and why talking about equity, and social justice are, key elements for resilience. So when we were speaking about accessibility, availability, and quality of housing, which is your perception in the Latin American region? Because, me as part of Chile GBC and as part of the network, we have been reading, for example, that in Europe, one of the things that they are talking about is rehabilitation or retrofitting in, social interest housing. But what do you see? What is your perception in, the American region related to quality housing, understanding that sustainability is also part of this quality?
Thank you. Thank you for bringing me the council to invite me to this important event. And I want to take just 2 minutes in order to have a general framework and also a general approach. So housing challenge. Housing challenges are related with rapid urbanization and mitigation and the impact of low-income households and community. Some general data, so 50% of population is urban globally. In America, for example, Central America is 80%, and is going to increase in the 2030 to 80% or even 90%, 85%, sorry, and 90%. 1/8 of the people is living in Islam. In 2025, 40% of the people are going to live in slums. And in this moment, globally, 1.6 billion people worldwide live in unsustainable housing. So this is something that also in LAC is Latin American Caribbean, 70% of the social production of housing is by self-construction or self-production. So this is something that is related about the management of the process is under control of the families or the people. And in general, is growing rates of informality, also inequality and substandards of housing. This is something that is related with the first point. And exclusion from networking infrastructure. And finally, some pushing in situation for the peripheric, because rural and urban somehow is attend, but peri-urban settlements are more challenged. In general, increased susceptibility to the impact of climate change and disaster. So this is also related to how is the approach. The approach that we are taking consideration is more related with the housing ecosystem approach, and it's going to be related in the topics that we are going to talk about. It's about the challenge of dynamic and multi-faced challenge across the housing ecosystem, market condition, policy, environmental, social, economic condition, environmental condition in general, and climate change effects. Solution requires collaboration between partners and sectors. So this is very, very important because housing is very complicated problem. And it starts with land rights, affordability, access to finance. Finance is also very important to take in consideration, particularly for low-income families, building materials and construction skills, infrastructure. So those are the general aspects. And how is the approach of the ecosystem? Complexity, as I mentioned, interlinks for this affordable housing. It's important to take the consideration that is a systematic change, what we need to look for, and identify barriers and opportunities, understanding needs and priorities from the community, and identify key stakeholders. In general, it's important, as this first point is people-centered, participatory process since the design, the selection of materials, the process of the construction supervision, remember that 70% of the population is self-construction. So construction technical assistance is important to take in consideration. So,
Juan Carlos, that 70% that you are mentioning is in an average for all the Latin American and Caribbean region?
yes.
Or do you have, this disclosure of information that maybe you have this problem that is more important or, in above the average, for example, in some of the regions, maybe in some countries, because I'm from Chile. So here in Chile, we have a lot of self-construction and informality in the construction, industry. So that is something that definitely we have to address, but it will be very useful to know because we are a huge region. So, and a huge region with different realities, different climates. So maybe to have, the disclosure of information will be very useful.
I think I don't have in this moment, but in average is 70%, 75%. Something that is related is how the countries are more aware about the policies of housing. Chile is very strong in subsidized, for example, and also construction technical assistance that is involved. But also, this is important to take the market approach. So in general terms, it's important that this is an important issue because the families build their houses in 15 to 20 years to finalize a house as a product. The most important is to have the house as a process, not as a final product. Yeah. So this is in general, but for example, Costa Rica, Mexico, Chile, different countries, Brazil, they have a very strong aspects of building codes. Caribbean countries are more in the way that they need to move in, for particular Haiti, for example. So this is important. And as I mentioned, resilience is related with the capacity of the families, with the capacity of empower and increase the management for the people. I'm going to finalize with this. The first problem in housing is this, the second tenure. Adequate land. This is something that we need to be more aware about policies in land in the country to have a reservoir of land for low-income families and land that have some approach to the livelihoods, because this is something that when it's different. So the quality of the housing is start with the adequate adequate land, and also to have a good process from the buildings by private sector, but very, very important to take in consideration the labor, the construction workers, in the increase the skills, because this is something that when it's involved private sector, of course they have a strong supervision, but social process as a social production of housing and habitat is not in the same level. And also resilience are related, or the risk and the vulnerability are related with the location of the house. Poors in general are more related in very risk environmental, and the vulnerability is exponential related with another low incomes.
What we call disaster risk planning and management. And this takes me to Elizabeth, to something that you mentioned last week and that, wowed me, because you mentioned, for example, we were talking and I told you that in Chile, because Chile, you have been here, that something that has been happening, these last 2 years is that we do not have enough housing. There is people that are living in emergency housing. So something that you mentioned was that in Mexico, you have housings, development that are not being used because they are in peripheral areas. So this takes me to, one thing is disaster risk planning, and we can, we cannot build in lands that are suitable to any type of natural disaster that will be happening, during that are already happening and will be happening in the next years. But I want you to tell me more, because you already told me, but I want to tell the attendants more about what is happening, with this housing that are not being used, because this is a huge reality of resources that are being, wasted, and people that cannot use these houses. So what is your perception, and tell us, please, that story.
Again, thank you very much for inviting me. And as Maria Fernanda was pointed out, the situation, and I think that this is not limited to Mexico, because I had the opportunity to talk to professionals in the US, professionals in other regions even, and we've noticed how fast construction is moving forward, especially in the downtown areas of our countries or of our cities. And we see this displacement of people who are not able to afford high-end buildings or high-end housing. However, the situation that we have observed, and this is an anecdote, a complete anecdote, we had this massive building a few blocks away from my house. It's a very high-end department unit. I had the opportunity to go and tour it because it was really interesting, the environmental goals that even the building had. And I noticed how the building is already sold out, but no one is inhabiting it. No one is living there. However, with the housing crisis that we are currently facing because of the pandemic and the human displacements and migration we have also because of the pandemic, but kind of exacerbated by it, because it's a natural phenomenon that we have observed growing and growing and growing. So I had the opportunity to see people who live on the streets, literally sleeping on the sidewalk of this building. And it was really shocking to me. These are people who I regularly talk to, because I really enjoy to, first, not to discriminate people because of their class or their race or anything like that. So I try to talk to people whenever I can. And we were talking about the conditions in which they left their homes, in which they have been traveling through Central America and Mexico. And they told me it's really interesting because we could be up here and we are not. So many people have encouraged me to take a picture, make a story about it. But there's a certain aspect of human dehumanization that happens with this phenomenon. People who live in the streets tend to be seen as less human or less valuable than people who own a home or that are able to afford a rent. So I think that was a very shocking experience to me, but we've come to a point to normalize the situation that happens because of the commodification of housing, as we are well aware because of literature, because of our professions, and because of the general information that we have access to. Housing is a right. So what happened along the way that we forgot that access to a living situation, a housing situation, it's a human right, not a commodifying good that we can just build up and have accumulate value through time, instead of accumulating value not in the economic sphere, but in the living situation. As important as it is to have access to food, water, education, it should be as important to have access to a living situation, a housing situation for everybody.
Yeah, well, to dignify
Exactly.
humankind. You know, that I think it's very interesting what is Nicolette saying, you know, mentioning in the chat, which is deshumanization and normalizing is so accurate, because it's what happens. And that I was very thrilled, you know, when Juanita invited me to moderate this panel about people, because, you know, Elizabeth, is something that moves me. So something that we, you know, can key points for this, you know, first part of the panel that we can take is planning, you know, smart planning, and to stop. I don't know if you, Juan Carlos and Elizabeth, agree, but we have, for example, many real estate companies in all the world, not only in Latin America, that make a lot of speculation of the land. So this is what causes, you know, that these low income homes, or, you know, social value homes, are placed in low value lands that are not only risky, that are very, you know, at a very long distance from, you know, transit, and from, you know, everything from any connection and services and everything. So in this specific point, that has to do with placement of housing, I would like to receive your feedback, starting with you, Elizabeth, and we are then moving to Juan Carlos.
Sure. I would just like to recommend this book right here. I wasn't prepared, but I had it right here. It's called Slow Violence and the Environmentalism of the Poor by Rob Nixon. Because in this book, they specifically talk about the phenomenon in which we distribute land according to risk. So if we have a landfill or a greenfield, a brownfield who was not even remedied yet, the prices of the houses and the buildings go down. So it's an offer that many people say it's like it is. It's the only way that they can afford to have a home. Mm-hmm. So that's really, really dangerous. And the concept of slow violence it's the thing that struck me the most about this book, because it talks about how this is an environmental crisis, this is a housing crisis, but is not as visible. And again, normalized. It's very normalized because we don't see the effect right away. We don't see it as a flaw. We don't see it as a drought. We don't see it as an explosion. Sometimes we do, but most of the time we see it in birth defects of kids and children. We see it in cancer occurrences and other health problems that we see along the way. So I really, really encourage everyone to read this book right now.
Thank you very much. Now we're moving to something that we called in our meeting community building. That is very important. So I want to start with you, Juan Carlos. Something that we were talking about is to relevate the importance of social and cultural integration. That is that we call, with these new demographic patterns and migratory crisis and generational turnover rate, which is something very important. I don't know if you know this, but this is a very important data that, for example, we in Chile, women, have only one and a little bit more, a kid per woman. So it's very important. We are the country in Latin America which has less kids. So this will, it's very interesting because I was reading that young population, a mom of 2 teenagers, are saying that they don't want to have kids because of the climate crisis, but this is not the solution. So about community building, when we talk about social and cultural integration in these, housing developments, and also, the placement of these developments near to, public space, quality public space and public transportation. And something that you mentioned last week, Juan Carlos, was this very interesting, view that you have about public space, the quality of public space, to generate a good quality of living, for the people nearby these housing developments. How do you see that, or you perceive this?
Yes, in general terms, to start the approach is that it's important the participatory process, and also as a cross-cut gender. This is important to take in consideration because in the social movements or social process, women are really in the front of the activities, and it's very important to have this gender agenda. And policies also require to have a difference between, for example, you mentioned the cities, centralized cities, they have different policies, and in the peripheria, the possibility to get land or to get the land with low performance or livelihood is critical. So in the community process related with not just with housing, is also for the habitat in general. That is how community engage with social process, and also involves not just the gender, but also youth that are important to aware and a sensitized process in order to be involved in the policies, because this is also to related with politic process in that part, and also is related this process and this engagement with the community to be to confront the speculation of the land, as you mentioned earlier. This is something that is quite difficult to sustain in a participatory process by the force that private sector, and not just private, also some individuals that speculate with land. So in general terms, the participatory is starting with negotiation at advocacy process in order to contribute in that. And and also we identify now in some neighborhoods that to get together in a more way or in the process to be take out of the drugs or violence, it's important to incorporate the youth in these public spaces. And public spaces sometimes are not used by this risk. And I think as a part of the engagement, need to be together public spaces, building public buildings, housing as a common in general. This is something that is part of the activities that in a community level need to be promoted as a part of the big frame, because at the end the people located in those communities are who use these public spaces, and there are some public spaces that are more transitory spaces in the cities, and also the connection with general settlements in housing and even in office and other services. My comment, thank you.
Yeah, it's very interesting. We in Chile have something that we call pocket parks, which are pocket squares, which are parks that have been built in residual spaces. It's very interesting. So I want to bring a comment from Nicolette, and that is very interesting. And sometimes we think that that is a reality only for Latin America and the Caribbean or the poorer countries in the world, but it's not. It surprises me a lot that like, I don't know, during the pandemic, 6 months ago, I was reading that a Chilean architect is working in New Zealand, building homes for the homeless. You see, New Zealand has homeless. Wow, that's something that we have this problem, all around the world. And Nikki's mentioning something very interesting, that in California, the governor just signed a law that allows more density and housing near, public transit. And it has a huge struggle because, the community that already lives there, something that I know you have already seen in your specific, countries and the work that you do, they present objections because they do not want maybe these poorer people, living in that's what we call, social integration. That is very important. So yeah, we must develop these policies. I know that we have, public policies at the end, but we can, come back to this. But if this is a huge problem in California, how do you think that we can solve this in Latin America? Because Latin America, is a very segregated society, something that you pointed out, Elizabeth. So we say, well, we must bring, these people to integrate with another, society scales and diversity, of income. So do you think, is it possible? How do you think that we can achieve, this in Latin America, something that, for example, California has been working in? So Elizabeth.
Well, I think we've seen that in Mexico happening right now. We talk about the migratory processes of people as something that has to do with race and class. But the discussion has been around, oh, but these movements are legal or illegal, whereas in nature, and we as sustainability professionals know, birds don't need passports, So I think that that's a lesson that we need to learn as humanity. And I'm bringing this again because it has to do a lot of with how we see the cities, who is able to occupy these or those spaces. So I think there's a lot of interests in maintaining the economic and production model that we have, because it works for certain people, and these are decision makers. So whilst that still seems to work, it in reality we see we can open our windows, we can open our doors, and see that that is not actually working. The problem is, how do we engage these people in realizing the value of making policies available for everybody. And making, this is not to enter the moral sphere of things, but how do we kind of advocate for the best that we can do as human beings, the best that we can do as a species. Because again, the survival of the planet as a whole, thinking this about like we see in plants, animals, minerals, bugs, etc., we see that the integration of these components is what makes the earth great. So we need to see our humanity, our people, the same way that we see as professionals, as decision makers, as environmentalists, the same reality. We don't need passports or credit cards or stuff like that to have access to basic human rights. So that I think that's the main thing that I would say could make us shape-shift this paradigm in the moral sphere again. But in the most important thing, I think, because of the economic and political model that we have, is to make policies just like the ones that they're coming up with in California, because that will make a really huge transformation in our landscape. I don't know if that makes sense for your question.
So yeah, what we have, is keywords: integration, very important, planning, very important, and to understand, that it's not about only, policies and politics, but also about culture and transformation of the people. So that's very important. So now I want to invite our attendants to answer the first poll that is going to be related to the Sustainable Development Goals. That is something that we will, chat with our two experts today, Elizabeth and Juan Carlos. So please, this, is a very short poll. So the last poll is longer. So you have 3 minutes, please, to answer this, because we are going to start talking with Elizabeth and Juan Carlos about sustainable development goals and how are they related, to building resiliency for people. So amazing if you can, start answering. What do you think in Latin America, which of the following sustainable development goals represents the greatest challenge to achieve by 2030? So you have to, there are 5 SDGs, so you have to select 3, please, that you think that represent, the greatest challenge to achieve. More specifically, for the Latin America and Caribbean region, which represents, more of the gaps in terms of achieving. Well, I don't know if that's true. I don't know if you just wrote about the climate tracker publication that they were, I don't know, 37 countries, I think, that they divided, on Chile and Peru and Mexico. We were doing insufficient things, to achieve the SDGs, and there was only one country, which is, I don't remember if it's Ghana or another country in Africa, that was much more advanced, the countries in Latin America, and it is valid. I remember that Mexico, Peru, Colombia, Chile, in the US, we were on the same stage, which is insufficient. So it's a very important question related to social equity. So I don't know, Juanita, I think that you're managing this. So when we have, the answers, very interesting. I don't know, maybe if we can, leave this information here to go to our next phase of the discussion, which is centered in sustainable development goals and these gaps. In your experience, Juan Carlos, I want to start with you first. In your experience and all your knowledge and all these years that you have been working in this, what do you think that are, the specific issues for example, connectivity and services, availability and quality of water, and energy poverty? Energy poverty is a key issue in many countries that have, for example, cold climates, like, for example, Chile and Argentina, and also in some areas of Mexico. So in your case, Juan Carlos, you've seen this that you're, seeing in your screen. What do you think that are the main gaps and challenges for Latin America in terms, of construction and resilience and people?
Let me start, Maria Fernanda, what we see about the connection with standard, this global standard sustainable development goals related with housing, and then I go to your question. There are 5 standards that are strongly connected with housing, and those are something that housing can approach and also deliver as more related results. Goal number 1, no poverty. This is something that builds resilience, reduce vulnerability to economic, social, and climate-related shocks and disasters. So this is something that housing is related with that. Also, economic resources and housing and the economic and control of the land. This is important because the land is connected also with poverty. And goal number 5, gender equity, is important to access and housing protect the woman for the discrimination policies and practice that we have. For example, land distribution, titling, and other ones. Number 6, clean water and sanitation is important. The connection between housing and water and sanitation is as a part of the connection in the services, but also as an individual decentralized systems. This is important to take in consideration in relation with housing. Goal number 7, affordability and clean energy is very important. These kind of passive or active technologies that can be related with housing and contribute to reduce the CO2, for example, and this is also related with pollution and climate change. And finally, the goal number 11, sustainability, cities and community, is access to affordable, adequate, safe, inclusive housing. This is important because is looking for integrated housing frameworks, support economy, social and environmental policies, planning, infrastructure. So and the others are also important connection with housing, but these 5 are more important. So in general terms, poverty is one of the important by the exclusion of the economic process for the people. And gender, as I mentioned, is important, at least in LAC, particularly in Central America and Southern Mexico, is still important aspects to move for the gender and the participation of the woman in the whole process. We call about settlement planning, urban planning, and housing. And in general terms, energy is important because sometimes we select some technologies that are very good, but we avoid or we don't take in consideration transport. And this is something that is strongly related. So this is so important. And these are connection in the levels of the stakeholders and also the participatory in general. So this is PPP, public, private, and people. It's not the way that is just for the government or the private sector. It's because also communities can engage and contribute to reduce according to the selection of the process in the construction system, for example, but also how they recycle the materials. So those are the general aspects that are more aware about connection with sustainable development goals with housing. My comment, thank you.
Thank you very much, Juan Carlos. In your case, Elizabeth, and because we have only 10 minutes left, and I want to talk about public policy, which is very important. Elizabeth, in your experience that you have been working, during the last years in terms of the SDGs and also corporate responsibility, how do you see, the principal gaps for the Latin American region in terms of, not only the SDGs that I mentioned and we, put on the poll, but in your experience, you can include also another SDGs as well as Juan Carlos did recently.
Actually, I'm very glad that I'm seeing that on the screen because I was going to mention 17. Partnerships are really, really important and are really, really crucial to maintain this process. Obviously, I'm skipping 11 because of the resilience that we are talking about, and I think that's something that is in the top of the mind of everybody right now. But why the importance to me, at least, to consider 17 goal partnership goal, for goals, because we have seen statistically this is a massive crisis, this is a massive problem. There's not going to be one organization, one country, one president, one city, or one people who person sorry, one person to solve this issue. and not even groups of people. We need everybody on the same page. So I think it's really important for us to realize the importance of partnerships with strong organizations, as well as the 17th Sustainable Development Goal. So I think one of the main focus I will contribute is to realize the importance of working together despite of our differences in politics, economics, socials, etc.
Yeah, we're not doing that well in terms of the Latin American region. Now going to public policy, because there are a few minutes left. And there is a question, from Nicolette, which is very interesting, and says, how seriously are national and local governments taking the risk of homeless and displacement in cities in Latin America? It's very interesting because I read, a couple of days ago that like millions of people, I don't remember the exact name, will, be victims of internal displacement, as a result of the climate crisis. So in your expertise, Juan Carlos and Elizabeth, how do you see, the public policies having, carrying out this crisis for the future, in terms of displacement of people, and how this will increase, homeless in the different countries in Latin America and the Caribbean? Juan Carlos.
I think in the case of advocacy and policy is some key intentions. One is related with land. This is very important, as I mentioned, and as a cross-cut gender, as I mentioned, but also is related about urban planning, related about the balance between increase the use of the center and how it's going to impact the periphery or the perimeter. And in particular, it's important to promote, there are some good experience in LAC related with rent housing, and also the use of empty buildings, in particular in the center of the cities. But it's important to promote the participation of the population in order to be involved in the planning, in the budget, in the relation with environmental aspects. So this is key aspects that also how we can promote or emphasize these relations, because we already have been doing this since the past, but how we is going to mention from homeless, for example, that you mentioned. This is something that, but I think homeless is very important, but something that is pushing our countries is migration globally, but particularly migration, illegal migration, that are looking and moving through different countries. Caribbean comes to Colombia, Panama, Central America, Mexico, in order to go to the United States in the expectation to have a better life. So migration is not housing for migrants is not a good response yet. So policies need to be involved, not just for the humanitarian part, is also to develop houses for these people that sometimes spend 10 years, 2 years, 5 different years in order to pass by for one country to another country, but sometimes they stay there and they are not involved in the codes, in the regulations, and in the policies. This is my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. I know that we could talk about this forever, but in terms of public policies, Elizabeth, how do you see, because for example, here in Chile, we have something that is the social carbon that is, calculated for all the public developments. But we are talking about, the whole Latin American region, the all American region and the Caribbean. And how do you think that we could, strengthen, the institutions, the governance and everything to make them understand that this social variable is very important, this social factor? How do you think that we could strengthen this institution? And then we are going to go to the last poll and then, give the welcome to the next discussion panel.
Well, first, I think I'm agreeing with Juan Carlos. I think we have taken huge steps to consider migration. Just a few days ago, the 6th Cumbre y Comunidad de Estados Latinoamericanos Caribeños, which is a summit that we had with our presidents of the region of Latin America and the Caribbean, I think they've made this important discussions about migration, which is not a question of when, but it is not a question of if, but when. And I think I also agree with Juan Carlos, in which we need to advocate for new policies for housing, for the distribution of land. I think that's one of the main problems that we have right now. So in terms of alliances, politics, I said it before, I think we have a huge task up in front of us, but I am also positive, hopelessly positive, I think, about what the people, the citizens that we are doing. We're taking the steps to voice our concerns. So I think that's really important, and that will make a change eventually. So that's one thing, but also the local policy is really important. We usually think about policy as presidents and governors, but policy is also made on the street with your neighbor, with your friends, with your family. So I think that's the first thing that I would like to address. How do we think the landscape as a community, as a street, as a block, as a park, as neighbors? Then we can move forward to advocate and to vote and to use whatever resources in terms of policy we have.
Yeah, participation of the society is a key factor. So now to finish, we prepared a poll for you. That is, which are the most urgent variables related to social resilience in the built environment that the construction industry should strengthen? Please answer 3. I know that we are running a little, we already ran out of time, and there is another very interesting panel to come. So please, as fast as you can, answer this poll. So there is very important information that we want to, gather from your answers. So as you see, we are, including social and cultural integration, accessibility and availability to quality homes, green and safe public spaces, very important, combat energy poverty and improve habitability conditions, warranty access to water suitable for human consumption, and availability of low-income housing, and not considered risky and close to transport and service areas. So I know that maybe we think that we need all, but it's very important that you prioritize, these 3 key, urgent variables that you think that we need to improve building resilience in terms of people in the region. So I don't know, Juanita, maybe you can explain afterwards if we can, for example, share the results of the polls with all the attendants and also with our experts in the panel. So Juan Carlos and Elizabeth, while people is answering the poll, I want to thank you very, very much. Please feel free, to get to the World DBC and also to Chile DBC. We are always help you and to get help from you and everything that we can. So this is very interesting because it seems that everything is, a very urgent variable for the region, but, availability of low-income housing and land, in lands not considered risky, that is something that we were talking about, this real estate speculation with some of the lands and the passports that Elizabeth was also mentioning. So thank you very much for being here. And now, Juanita, I think that you have to welcome the next panel. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Juan Carlos. Let's keep talking about this, please.
Thank you, everybody.
Have a great day.
Thank you so much for the invitation. Be safe.
Thank you very much to Maria Fernanda, Juan Carlos, and Elizabeth for joining us in the first session of this webinar, Journey to Resilience in the Americas.